Thank you for joining us for our Stages of Growth series. We have a really special one today. We're talking about the stages of a nonprofit startup. So what are the different things that you would go through if you're starting your nonprofit? Maybe you're ready to launch. Maybe you've been thinking about this for a little while and you think, it is time for me to start my nonprofit. Or maybe you're thinking, okay, I've got someone working on this and they volunteered to help me, but how do I even know if they know what they're doing, right? Or if you're not even ready to launch, you kind of want to know what's involved, which that tends to happen too. So like the planners that are out there, and I tend to be a little bit of a planner, maybe you're thinking, okay, when am I going to be ready? How do I even know to plan this if I don't even know what's involved? So what we're going to do today is just run through the major steps in setting up your nonprofit. We've seen a lot of buzz on Facebook. We have a lot of people asking us continuously, what's involved? What is the process all about? It sounds so complicated. Or conversely, we have people saying, oh, I just asked my CPA to set it up. And then we take a look at what's been set up and, maybe they missed a couple things. So this really hopefully is going to clarify for you what is involved in starting up a nonprofit. So we're talking about a tax-exempt, federally tax-exempt organization in the United States, right? If you have an NGO overseas, maybe you're looking to set up an arm in the United States, that would be your fundraising mechanism. Sometimes they're called sister entities in the States, or people call them a friends of. Or maybe you are a nonprofit that's just getting launched in the United States and you need to set up your 501c3. So let's run through some of those steps. All right. The first thing is you have to think about what is the governance structure. What is the structure of the organization going to look like? In most cases, you would have a minimum of 3 board members. So you want to identify those 3 board members. Go ahead and speak to them about joining your board. Typically they would take the roles of, or the offices we call them, of president, treasurer, and secretary. And so of your board members, let's say you have a board of 9 people, those are your directors on the board. 3 of them are going to be the officers in this case, right? Now we can have more officers if we choose to, but in this case we're going with president, treasurer, and secretary. You're going to need that information because when you file your articles with your Secretary of State, you have to list the directors on your board. Now, I do want to mention that every state is a tiny bit different. So you might have some variances in the forms or in the documents that you file to the Secretary of State, but at a minimum, you're going to be listing your board members. You're probably going to be asked for a registered agent, which is basically either an individual or a company that can accept mail for you. So if you are served any documents by the federal government or by your state government, if anything comes in that requires a response from you, if there's a legal document that comes in, typically you need to have a registered agent. So that would be an office that's open from 9 to 5 to receive mail. And along with your directors and your registered agent, you also need to have a charitable purpose clause or your for-purpose clause and your dissolution clause. So those are things that are really important. And if you look on the IRS website and you Google dissolution, there are actually some samples of language that they're looking for. So that's really helpful. So when you prepare your articles, those are then going to be submitted to the Secretary of State. Depending on what state you're in, sometimes they get filed within 24, 48 hours. Sometimes it takes a week, 10 days, it depends. And you should be able to log into your Secretary of State site and actually see the listing once you've been filed. So once you're filed, you are registered. So this is amazing how you can actually be registered as a nonprofit and only with your state so far, right? Because we haven't done the federal one yet, but you are registered as a nonprofit entity in that state. So the next step would be, and I typically try to do this together because they're legal documents, you do want to create your bylaws and your conflict of interest policy. You can access templates for those online. You can ask somebody who's already set up their nonprofit if they're willing to share their bylaws and conflict of interest policy with you, or you can have an attorney or someone prepare them for you. So you would need so we're looking at 3 legal documents, your articles, which are going to get filed. Bylaws and conflict of interest don't get filed anywhere officially, so technically. You do need to have them as your governing documents. They're going to talk about things like term limits for your board members and so on. But when you file with the IRS, which we're going to talk about in a moment, your long form, you actually need to include a copy of your articles, bylaws, and conflict of interest. So even though you're not actually registering those bylaws anywhere, you need to have them prepared so that you can also submit copies of them. So once your articles are filed and you are officially a nonprofit in that state, you can get your EIN. EIN is really easy. It's your employer identification number. Sometimes it's called an FEIN, federal employer identification number. And that's a really easy process to do online. If you have someone do it for you, make sure that you're covered and you fill out an SS4 form and you sign it, which basically gives them the ability to, on your behalf, secure your EIN. So you'll have that in a couple of minutes. Here's the most amazing news. With your articles filed and your EIN, technically you could go open a bank account, which is amazing because we all need to open that bank account when we're starting a nonprofit, right? Because money needs to come in or you're paying some bills, etc. So in order to do that, you do need to have your organizational meeting. Organizational meeting is the first official board meeting. And in that board meeting, you're going to approve all of the actions that have been taken so far to incorporate and register the organization. And you're going to approve the opening of a bank account. So now we go back to the bank. So if you were to then go open your bank account, you're going to take a copy of the minutes of that organizational meeting as proof that the board has approved that you open the bank account. You could also include who the signers on the account are going to be when you set up this bank account. And then what they'll do is at the bank, they're probably going to look in the Secretary of State's registry, make sure that you're listed, check that you've got the boards, the directors that you've said you have, and the officers that you said you have. So that's a great, that's like a great first step because you feel so good that you've gotten your articles filed, you're registered on the Secretary of State, you've got your EIN, you've got your bank account. Those are wins, right? So unfortunately, we're only halfway there, but that's okay. So the next thing really would be to make a decision if your organization or you anticipate the organization bringing in under or over $50,000 per year each of the first 3 years. So if I'm thinking this is going to be a fairly small nonprofit, volunteer run, let's say we're taking in gently used clothing, we're washing it, folding it, preparing it to then donate to individuals who need it. There may not be a whole lot of money flowing through the organization for those first 3 years, right? Because most of it's going to be donated items and then we're going to be giving them away as well. So maybe the budget's going to be less than 50 for each of the first 3 years. That means you can apply for your 501c3 designation with a 1023 easy form. It's $275. It's online. If you have someone help you, make sure that you're there during the process and you approve everything when the account is set up because you want to be sure that unless you've given power of attorney to someone, it really shouldn't be an outside person doing this for you unless you're with them and you're doing it together or you do it yourself. So that's that 1023 easy form. The alternative to that is the long form, and that would be for organizations that think they might be bringing in more than $50,000 each of the first 3 years or any of those first 3 years. And that long form, as we call it, the 1023 long form, the entire document is 26 pages. You may only have to complete the first 11 or 12. If you do scholarships, you may have to complete a few others, or if you run a school, there are different stipulations, but basically it's going to be the first 11 pages, and they are a little extensive. You do need to have a budget, so some sort of forecast of your income and expenses for the first 3 years, and they'll ask for some information on your board members. So not only are you completing the form, so the packet, but there's going to be an addendum where you're asked to, for example, in a Word document, list out the present, past, and future activities of the organization. You're going to talk about the duties of the board members and how many hours you expect them to be spending on this work every week, working for the nonprofit. So it's really going to be a deep dive into the organization. Very doable. Okay, everyone can do this. There's no reason why not. So that is the 1023 long form. Now, with the short form, typically approval will come through between 2 weeks and 2 months. So if you can kind of just calculate, that's about the amount of time, on both sides, really, that those should take. And then you will get something, by the way, from the IRS stating that the application is in progress. And then for the long form, it could be anywhere between 2 months and 6 months. Typically takes a little bit longer. If you are in a disaster situation or there's a grant that's being held up based on your status, you can expedite that and submit an expedite letter. So that's an option as well. And then once you have your IRS determination letter, which is what we call the document that comes back from the IRS that basically is like the stamp of approval, your official, you're a 501c3, you can then file for your charitable solicitation registration. in your state, in most states, there is a need for you to file this, which basically just gives you permission to solicit donations. So make sure that you take care of that. And then the other thing is, don't forget to file for your sales tax exemption, because not only do you not have to pay taxes, and do your donors get a tax exemption for whatever portion of their donation that qualifies, remember, because it's not automatically 100% of their gift, it's based on their personal tax circumstances. So we want to be careful when we talk about that language. But you also don't have to pay sales tax. So if you have, for example, a board retreat in a hotel and you rent a conference room, you wouldn't have to pay the tax on that. If you're buying office supplies, if you are a disaster relief organization and you're buying building supplies, you do not have to pay sales tax. So it's money on the table if you don't actually file for your sales tax exemption. So just remember that in all of this, what we want to do is be as honest and truthful as we can, be as transparent as we can. There is no shame in starting out. There is no shame in submitting a form that says your budget for the first year is 0. Okay, everybody starts from 0 at some point or another, right? Everybody's bank account, everyone who has a nonprofit, their bank account at some point was at 0, right? I mean, it started from something. So just keep in mind that there are stages to this. And by the way, there's help, right? There are free resources out there. You can maybe ask your local chamber if they have someone that can help provide some resources. There are a lot of associations that help with resources. And then, of course, we're always here. We're always available. We have our community forum. You can post your questions there. We're happy to answer those for you. And even here at the Kannico Agency, we're happy to advise you. If you say, you know, Kirsten, I really feel like I might be able to do this myself because I, have filed documents before or whatever. Great, we want you to do that. But just know that you have us here as a resource. You can always come to us and ask us questions. We do offer a 1-hour free consultation to any client that comes that needs to sit with us and ask us questions. The other thing is you may get to a certain point and then think, you know what, I need help. Fine, we'll pick it up from where you're able to leave off. So however this works for you, if this is your dream, and by the way, let me just say, not everyone who thinks they should be setting up a nonprofit should set up a nonprofit, right? There are times when what you have is a beautiful idea, but either it's been replicated already, it's been done before, or it's being replicated, or perhaps it's unrealistic, or maybe the focus is too narrow. Maybe you need to be a program of another nonprofit. Maybe if you're not 100% sure if this is going to work, you should try it out as an experiment. Maybe don't. You have 27 months to file for your 1023, which is your 501c3. So if you file your articles, you have 27 months from the date of those being filed to file your IRS short or long form. And by the way, any donations that come in are retroactive to the date that you filed your articles. So you have time to kind of experiment and see if this is really going to work. Now, you will have people saying to you, well, if you don't have your IRS determination letter, I can't give you this donation, et cetera, et cetera. But it all depends on your particular situation. So just remember, not everyone is meant to be setting up their own 501c3. But if this is your dream, and if you think it's viable, if you think it's sustainable, and you think you're going to make an impact in the world, I encourage you to explore this. I encourage you to think about this. Reach out to us for help. And don't forget about that community forum powered by Kannico on Facebook, where you can ask all of your questions. We're so happy to answer them. So best of luck on starting your nonprofit. And please reach out to us if we can be of any assistance in any way. And just remember, we're all about changing the world. So if this is something that's a good fit for you and it resonates, go for it.